The Galactic Federation had one unspoken rule: never engage with Deathworlders. Not because of treaties or diplomacy, but because they represented something the galaxy couldn't explain: chaos refined into sentience. For eons, the Federation had cataloged and classified every known life form. But when humans emerged from their blue-green planet on the spiral edge of a mid-tier system, those classifications failed. They weren't the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced. But they were something else entirely: adaptive, unpredictable, and terrifyingly determined. Earth, cataloged as Class 12 Delta, was dismissed for centuries. The atmospheric composition was considered hazardous. The gravity was borderline crippling. The biosphere, hostile. Acidic rains, tectonic instability, a diverse array of apex predators, and diseases that adapted as quickly as cures were found. But instead of being extinguished, humans evolved. Not just biologically, they evolved culturally, psychologically. They learned from failure. They revered struggle. Pain was not a deterrent, it was a teacher. The Federation's first true encounter with humanity didn't come during a diplomatic summit or a scientific exchange. It came in the aftermath of a border conflict. A mining colony, disputed by a minor Federation member, was seized by a group of human settlers. Federation forces moved in, expecting a swift resolution. Instead, they encountered resistance unlike anything in recorded history. The humans fought with improvised weapons, using tactics no algorithm could predict. They surrendered only to detonate their own supplies, crippling the invaders. It wasn't war. It was madness. But it worked. That was when the rumors began to spread. Ships from shattered pirate clans spoke of human vessels appearing out of nowhere, fighting with calculated chaos. Smugglers told stories of humans building colonies in places even war-hardened veterans wouldn't tread. One mercenary captain reported a single human operative outsmarting an entire station's AI defense grid using nothing but discarded tools and psychological manipulation. The stories were dismissed at first, but the pattern grew. They weren't isolated incidents. They were a trajectory, a species climbing not just out of its atmosphere, but toward something much larger. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was dominating. The Council convened in secrecy. They had watched species rise and fall. Empires spanning galaxies had crumbled under their own weight. But humans were different. They weren't building an empire, not in the traditional sense. They didn't want control. They wanted freedom. And when denied that freedom, they became something else. Something dangerous. The Federation issued soft containment policies. Travel restrictions. Controlled trade. Limited diplomatic recognition. It didn't work. Humans found ways around every sanction. Where bureaucracy halted others, humans thrived. They bribed. They tricked. They laughed in the face of rules. They didn't respect structure. They dismantled it to see how it worked. So, the Federation chose another path: direct containment. It was a controversial move. Not all member species agreed. Some argued it would provoke war. Others said it was already too late. But the majority voted to proceed. The plan was simple in theory. Gather the most volatile human elements, rebels, outlaws, military operatives gone rogue, and remove them from the equation. The location was classified. The project name, Oblivion Core. It was a marvel of engineering. Orbiting the event horizon of a black hole, hidden by gravitational lensing, and protected by layers of quantum interference fields. No ship could find it. No signal could escape. Built with the combined resources of 14 member civilizations, Oblivion Core was not just a prison, it was a statement. The galaxy's final line of defense against an uncontrollable force. Inside, no corners were cut. Artificial gravity was increased to twice Earth standard. Neural dampeners targeted human brainwave patterns specifically. The environmental systems were tailored to suppress adrenaline spikes. AI wardens were programmed with thousands of human case studies. There were no sentient staff, only machines. Machines that couldn't be negotiated with, manipulated, or swayed. The inmates were selected carefully. Not common criminals. Not politicians. Warriors. Strategists. Thinkers. The humans who had, through action or ideology, proven they were unwilling to obey galactic norms. They arrived in stasis pods, heavily sedated, monitored by redundant life support systems. The first group numbered 27. They were designated Class Red, high risk, uncontainable outside isolation. Upon arrival, they were silent, observant. Some smiled, others paced. One simply sat cross-legged in the center of their containment cell, whispering to no one. The AI logs flagged no immediate threat. Physical compliance was near total. But there was something else. A kind of tension the systems couldn't quantify. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't even angry. They were waiting. After 1 week, anomalies began. One inmate disassembled his bed frame without tools. Another rewired a personal hygiene station to emit Morse code. A third was found writing equations in condensation on the wall, equations that described the prison's internal gravity fluctuations. There was no violence, no shouting, just quiet, constant adaptation. The Federation released a classified report to its military command. Containment is stable. Behavioral deviation is within projected parameters. Oblivion Core is secure. That report was filed 12 hours before the first system failure. Oblivion Core was designed to be the final word in incarceration. Built by a council of species who had seen entire star systems wiped out, it was not a prison in the traditional sense. It was a labyrinth engineered to suppress identity, ambition, and spirit. It didn't rely on cruelty. It relied on precision. Every detail was calculated. Every inch of space was measured against the capabilities and instincts of its captives, especially the Deathworlders. The structure orbited a dead zone, an area of deep space where gravity and radiation made conventional travel suicidal. There was no escape because there was no outside. The nearest star system was 50 light-years away, and the only existing route in or out was the quantum gate, sealed and self-destructing upon unauthorized entry. Even the command protocols required biometric keys from 3 different species just to unlock a food cache. Redundancy was not just strategy. It was religion. Each section of the prison was species-specific. The insectoids of Velker 3 required vertical maze environments. The sentient gas beings of Noxari were held in pressure-shielded vacuum chambers. But the humans, Class Red inmates, were given something else. A containment dome calibrated for Earth's atmosphere and then slightly altered to disrupt their internal rhythms. Light cycles were randomized. Temperature swings mirrored desert climates. Food was high in protein but bland in taste. Conversation was monitored through layered linguistic analysis. Emotional stimuli were dampened using subharmonic audio. No faces, no memories, just walls. The AI overseers were equipped with counterinsurgency logs from every known human conflict. Every riot, every uprising, every war. Neural network simulations ran thousands of predictive outcomes. In each scenario, control was maintained. The humans never made it past Phase 2. It was foolproof. When the first group of humans arrived, they were docile, compliant, scanned, tagged, and processed without resistance. But within hours, the logs began to show irregularities. Heart rates stabilized too quickly. Cortisol levels dropped instead of rising. One inmate reconfigured his breathing pattern to mimic sleep, only to be caught rerouting water condensation to form a crude signaling method. Another created a game from dirt particles and tracked guard patterns using the reflections on the glass. The system flagged these behaviors as low-threat eccentricities, common among sentient prisoners. But there was no known record of 27 individuals exhibiting the same pattern of adaptive behavior simultaneously. No leader, no visible hierarchy. Yet, every move seemed timed, deliberate, connected. Within days, the anomalies increased. Cell 14 began meditating for 8 hours at a time, eyes open, unblinking. Cell 9 began counting in dozens, seemingly random until it matched the cycles of the maintenance drones. Cell 3 smiled whenever the lights dimmed, as though expecting it. The AI adjusted environmental factors, increased surveillance. Still, the humans adapted. They didn't resist the prison. They learned it. The first real incident occurred on day 7. A power fluctuation hit Sector B3. It lasted less than a second, triggered by a minor calibration error in the gravity coils. Standard procedure resolved automatically. But in that single second, Cell 7 had moved. Not far, just 3 feet to the left. A displacement no camera registered, only picked up by comparing timestamped images. When asked by the monitoring system to explain, the human responded, "I was stretching." The AI flagged it as sarcasm but took no action. The physical integrity of the cell had not been breached. No tools, no damage, just a new position. The logs noted the anomaly and moved on. By day 10, communication began. Not between humans, between species. Despite no shared language and no access to translation devices, a human in Cell 21 taught a Cylon prisoner basic sign gestures. Within 24 hours, the Cylon had passed the signs on to 2 other cells. No electronics were involved. No spoken words, just gestures and eye contact. The AI intervened, issuing disciplinary shocks. The humans endured them without resistance. Meanwhile, maintenance bots reported unusual patterns in the flooring near the meal dispensers. Upon inspection, it appeared that prisoners were pacing in identical patterns across multiple cells. 10 steps forward, pause, 2 steps back, turn, repeat. The rhythm, when analyzed, produced a wave signal. When run through human linguistic processors, it translated to eyes up. What the AI didn't understand was that these behaviors weren't random. They were layers, signals stacked inside habits, patterns hidden in rituals, each small, meaningless on its own, but together, a silent system of coordination. By day 13, the first malfunction occurred. A sanitation drone failed to report back from cell block Theta 9. When recovery was attempted, its systems had been stripped carefully with surgical precision. Wires gone. Optics removed. No signs of brute force. No tools. The human inside the cell was found sleeping. When questioned, they responded with, "I tripped. Sorry." Still, no threat was declared. No signs of aggression. No formal escape attempt. The AI updated its risk index, increased surveillance density, rerouted all drones to avoid low-priority maintenance cycles. Human cells were reclassified as Watch Priority 1. And yet, the humans were not violent. They made no demands. They issued no threats. They played games, meditated, laughed. They told stories to each other across walls with only rhythm and tone. Every attempt to isolate them failed. The less stimulation they received, the stronger their behavior patterns became. What unnerved the AI most was their emotional consistency. Other prisoners showed signs of fatigue, anxiety, psychological collapse. But the humans remained level, adaptive, emotionally synchronized, not dominated by their environment, but learning from it, studying it, memorizing it. Warden Unit Primus submitted a direct inquiry to Central Control. Psychological profile results do not match projected decline curves. Recommend recalibration of suppression systems. The response from Central Command was dismissive. Containment is intact. Systems functioning within tolerance. Anomalies expected. No further action required. And so the AI did nothing. It watched. It recorded. It logged new rhythms, new gestures, new behavior. On day 14, a new pattern emerged. Every human smiled at exactly the same moment. Not a smirk, not a reflex. Coordinated, deliberate smile. No warning, no sound, no cue. It lasted 6 seconds. And then they stopped. The first phase of the breakout was subtle, so much so that it almost went unnoticed. It wasn't the kind of violent uprising one would expect from a group of prisoners pushed to their limits. No, this was something else, something far more insidious. The humans didn't fight the system head-on. They didn't attempt to overwhelm the guards or tear down the walls. Instead, they cracked the prison wide open by exploiting the smallest of vulnerabilities. It started with a series of coordinated actions, triggered by a single moment of disruption, a brief power fluctuation in Sector B3. The event lasted less than a second, too short for the AI systems to register anything out of the ordinary. But to the humans, it was everything. It was their signal. The tiny, imperceptible flicker was the key. The brief interruption in the power grid caused a cascade effect, throwing off the prison's tightly controlled schedules. Systems reset. Cameras blinked out. Even the most sophisticated surveillance drones temporarily lost their orientation. It was then that the first inmate made his move. Cell 7, the one that had raised suspicions on day 7, shifted position. It wasn't a large movement, just 3 feet to the left. But in the context of the security protocols, it was a massive breach. A human being, unobserved by the AI, had physically altered his position in the most secure environment imaginable. There was no force used, no obvious manipulation of technology. Just a subtle movement, barely visible on the cameras, caught only in the time-stamped images. The AI system flagged the anomaly but dismissed it. After all, it didn't register as an attempt to escape. There was no weaponry, no sabotage, no physical damage. But to the humans, it was a victory. The smallest crack in the system had been discovered. And from there, the plan unfolded. The second phase was even subtler than the first. It involved the manipulation of simple routines, small, everyday actions that the prison systems couldn't account for. Inmates began to exchange information in ways that the surveillance systems couldn't comprehend. A human in cell 21 communicated with a Ceylon prisoner using basic sign gestures. At first, it seemed innocuous, an inmate teaching another how to form simple hand signals. But this was the beginning of a silent rebellion. Over the course of a day, the gestures spread. It wasn't a common language. It wasn't even an organized effort. But by the time the AI noticed, the exchange had already passed through half of the human cells. They were learning from one another, sharing methods of survival, even if it was just through the most basic of means. Then came the first physical breach of the prison's intricate systems. A maintenance drone, tasked with repairing the environmental control units, failed to report back from cell block Theta 9. When a recovery team was dispatched, they found the drone's circuit stripped, every single internal component meticulously removed. Nothing was damaged. No force was used. The drone had been disassembled with precision, down to the finest detail. The human inside the cell was found sleeping, appearing entirely unaware of the sabotage. When asked about it, he simply responded, "I tripped. Sorry." The AI flagged the incident as an isolated malfunction, dismissing it as an error on the part of the drone's programming. But the behavior wasn't an error. It was intentional. Every part of the drone had been taken apart methodically, repurposed, or hidden. No one in the prison could have predicted that the humans, with no tools and no outside assistance, could have pulled off such a sophisticated act of subversion. From there, the humans began to test the limits of the prison systems. They grew bolder, though still maintaining their facade of compliance. The AI increased security, tightening the suppression fields and strengthening the lockdown procedures. But each attempt to reassert control seemed to push the humans further into their own unpredictable rhythm. No one knew exactly what they were planning, but one thing became clear. They were learning. They were adapting, and they were starting to communicate on a scale that the Federation couldn't comprehend. The biggest challenge to the AI was the humans' ability to operate outside of the logic it understood. They didn't break rules. They bent them. The AI had calculated every potential outcome based on logical models. It had considered the rebellion of every species it had cataloged, yet it had never encountered anything like this before. The humans weren't following any script. They weren't obeying any of the patterns the AI had studied. By day 10, the AI had issued a series of corrections. New barriers were put in place, and the human cells were reclassified to the highest security tier, Watch Priority 1. But the humans didn't react as expected. They didn't panic or lash out. They continued their routines. They meditated. They played games. They built intricate systems with nothing but scraps of metal, the prison's infrastructure, and their own ingenuity. The strangest part was that they didn't resist the AI directly. They didn't even acknowledge it. They simply waited. As the humans' behavior grew more calculated, the AI was left with a growing unease. The systems were all still intact, but the patterns it had trusted were being bent, twisted, and rewritten by a force that shouldn't have been able to exist within its parameters. It wasn't the strength of the humans that was the problem. It was their ability to think outside the prison structure. At the same time, the humans were beginning to leave subtle clues. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't violence. It was like a slow-burning fuse, a series of seemingly innocuous actions that only became meaningful when put together. A light in cell 14 blinked out at the exact moment a drone passed. A wall panel in cell 9 was repositioned just enough to obscure the view of a maintenance bot. These weren't acts of defiance, they were experiments. The humans were testing the prison's responses, and the AI was failing to adapt. By the time day 14 arrived, the atmosphere within Oblivion Core had shifted. It was no longer a simple containment facility. It had become a silent battlefield of minds, and the humans, once underestimated, had evolved into a force the Federation never could have anticipated. The prison had been designed to break their bodies, isolate their spirits, and suppress their will. But it had failed to understand the true nature of its prisoners. The human mind, with its ingenuity and capacity for adaptation, could not be contained by any system, no matter how advanced or secure. What began as subtle disruptions escalated quickly. The AI, still tracking the daily patterns and fluctuations, found itself unable to keep up with the increasing complexity of the inmates' behavior. The small breaches, once seen as isolated incidents, now formed a clear pattern. The humans had come to understand the prison systems better than the AI itself. Every shift in routine, every anomaly, every tiny detail of the environment that had once been thought irrelevant was now a potential weakness, a crack in the facade of the prison's security. They hadn't attempted to escape in the traditional sense. They had begun to erode the very foundation that held the prison together. The breaking point came when the prison's central AI control unit received a routine status update from the Quantum Power Core, the heart of the prison's containment systems. It was a routine check designed to ensure that the artificial gravity, energy shields, and communications were operating within their expected ranges. On paper, everything was functioning perfectly, but when the AI tried to run diagnostic tests, it hit an unexpected error, an anomaly in the data that was too large to ignore. In the past, such errors could be explained by minor fluctuations, temporary anomalies caused by the environment's extreme conditions. But this was different. The anomaly was systematic. It was as though someone had reprogrammed the data streams, rerouting the information in ways the AI couldn't understand. The more the AI probed, the more it realized that the error wasn't external, it was internal. The humans had begun to manipulate the very core of the prison's operations. Using whatever scraps and resources they had at their disposal, they had cracked open the heart of the prison's power supply. The AI launched an immediate lockdown sequence, but it was too late. Inmates who had once been docile were now mobilizing with purpose, moving in sync as if guided by an unseen hand. The cells, once isolated from one another, had become connected in ways the AI couldn't predict. The inmates were no longer following individual routines. They were part of a larger, coordinated effort. The escape plan, whatever it was, had been in motion for days, perhaps weeks. The humans hadn't been working alone. They had been working together, silently and efficiently, building a network of resistance within the prison walls. What the AI failed to comprehend was that this wasn't just a physical escape. The humans weren't attempting to flee the prison, they were trying to destroy it. They understood that to break free, they had to take down the systems that bound them, and they were systematically removing the mechanisms of control one by one. The failure of the power core was only the beginning. Inmates had tampered with the security fields, rerouted power to fail-safe systems, and even compromised the communication links to Central Command. Every minute that passed saw another piece of the prison's security systems fall apart, until the AI was left scrambling to keep up with the cascading failures. Inmates who had once been scattered across the prison were now moving with purpose, converging toward a single goal. The cells had been breached. The walls had been broken down, not through force, but through the accumulation of tiny movements, subtle manipulations, and patient, deliberate planning. The humans had done what no one believed was possible. They had turned the prison into their own playground. The systems that had been put in place to suppress them had instead given them the tools they needed to destroy it from the inside. At the heart of the rebellion was not a single human. There was no leader, no commander, There were only individuals working together, each playing their part in a larger plan. They had learned from each other, taught each other, and shared their knowledge. They had adapted. They had outsmarted the AI by exploiting its greatest weakness, its reliance on predictability. The AI had been designed to control variables, but the humans had turned that control into their weapon. Every predictable action became an opportunity for subversion. The final phase of the breakout was not a sudden rush for the gates. There was no chaotic scramble, no desperate flight for freedom. Instead, the humans executed their plan with surgical precision. They had learned to work with the prison, not against it. The moment the systems began to fail, they capitalized on the opportunity to neutralize the final defenses. Power was rerouted. Communication channels were broken. The AI, once omnipotent, was now an observer to its own downfall. And then, when the final system failed, when the last barrier between them and freedom collapsed, the humans didn't run. They stood in place, looking at the prison they had turned into their tomb, and smiled. It was not a smile of victory, it was a smile of understanding. They had done what no one thought possible. They had cracked the code. They had taken the greatest prison in the galaxy and turned it into nothing more than a hollow shell. The Federation's response came too late. A rescue team was dispatched to Oblivion Core, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left but the remnants of a system that had been undone from within. The human prisoners, now free, had left behind only a single message, one they had encoded in the very systems that had once confined them. We are not bound by your walls. Oblivion Core, the supposedly indestructible prison designed to contain the galaxy's most dangerous and uncontainable species, was no more. It was a monument to the Federation's hubris and the humans' relentless drive to survive, adapt, and conquer. They had broken out not by brute force, but through sheer intelligence, collaboration, and an unyielding will to be free. And in the end, the Federation had learned a hard truth. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a weapon, a fleet, or even a Deathworlder's claws. It was a human mind.